Welcome to the Modern Hippie Podcast, where we'll be exploring all of my favorite boundary-pushing people and topics surrounding consciousness, psychedelics, mental performance, functional medicine, living in alignment, and so much more. I'm your host, Barrett Perlman, a former pro wakeboarder turned body worker, energy healer, and well, a modern hippie. And I'm so glad you're here. Are you struggling to integrate your plant medicine or psychedelic experiences? Do you feel alone in your journey towards healing and self-discovery? It's time to discover the Sacred Integration Tribe. Our online membership community is dedicated to bringing people together to share their experiences and support one another on their healing journey. With access to a wide range of resources, including weekly expert guidance on live integration calls with me, Barrett Perlman, guest hosts, integration materials released monthly, and heart-centered peer support, you can finally find the tribe you've been searching for. Join Sacred Integration Tribe today at www.sacredintegrationtribe.com and discover the power of community on your path towards healing and personal growth. Again, that's sacredintegrationtribe.com. Welcome back to the Modern Hippie Podcast. I am joined today by Ryan Sprague, who is the Cannabis Coach. He is a visionary leader and helping the world reframe cannabis as the important, beautiful plant medicine that has the widest popularity and acceptance rate in society. Ryan also hosts two podcasts, the Highly Optimized Podcast and the one I've had the joy of joining him on this one time on Psychedelics. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ryan.
Barrett, I am so excited to be here. I was telling you before we hit record that I just wrapped up another podcast. And whenever I see podcasts on my calendar, it's like a fuck yes from my heart, because I think out of everything I do, like, yes, I obviously love what I do with cannabis coaching, and podcasting is tied for that. Being able to chat. Most of my life I was told you talk too much. So when I got into podcasting and people were like, please talk, I'm like, you had me at hello, so yeah. Great to be here.
I completely get that. Like I joke with my breathwork groups when I get up and I start to share my message, and I'm like, because I love to talk, here's a message that I have for you today. And I'm, starting a podcast was definitely also for me something that I love it. I love having these conversations, and just like people want to listen, like, hell yeah, sign me up.
Yeah, it's so much fun. Like that's again why I started two podcasts, because I realized after a while, at first when I started podcasting, I didn't have like cannabis coaching and other stuff I was doing. So it was really the only thing I was doing that was in my business, and so I was like, fuck it, let's release 2 episodes a week, which got to be crazy once I built out the other stuff, which is why I've now gone down to just one podcast, and now I'm bringing them actually together under one name, which is the Highly Optimized Podcast, and then the Highly Optimized Podcast Presents, and then all these little subsections. So like we were talking about before, so many things, so many things to do.
Yeah, we were having a conversation right before we started recording about the life of this sort of entrepreneur that we're both living, where, I have a virtual assistant. He's been dying for a virtual assistant, and just like all the little tasks that it really takes to run a podcast, to run a business, to run a coaching program, to see people in person. It's like, there's a lot.
Never a dull moment, for sure, and thank goodness for that, because honestly, I love going so long as I'm going in the right direction of things that actually charge me up, and for a lot of my life, I know you can resonate. I imagine many of your listeners can too. I realized that I was going in the wrong direction. So to be able to do it now in the direction that feels in alignment with my heart is something that I am forever grateful for, and so every time that, I, think for a second of like getting stressed out or anything, I'm like, would you rather be stocking shelves or sitting in a cubicle? And then every part of me is like, nope, we're actually fine doing this. This is totally fine. We're not stressed at all, So it's a really good pattern interrupt.
Yeah. And let me ask, what did that feel like for you when you weren't living in alignment? Like, where was it in your body? What did that feel like in your days?
That's a really good question. So it felt like a lot of restraint. It felt like a lot of constriction, and it felt like a lot of paddling upstream. I would always feel it like in the center line of my body, and especially the back of my head. I would, funny story that I'll tell you real quick. So, I'm someone why I created a business called Highly Optimized is because I'm obsessed with discovering how good I can feel on a day to day and moment to moment basis, and so there came a certain point right before I started Highly Optimized where I was almost at like, not my lowest point, but like my most frustrated point. And I had been dealing with, since, when my father passed away, I didn't exactly know how to handle it. So I just started going in every direction I could to stay as busy as possible. And what ended up happening after a while was I ended up getting a lot of neck tension. Like I
Mm.
remember, this is, a story that's happened quite a few times in different ways, but I was working out far too much because, contrary to popular belief, there is like too much you can do with working out and even something quote unquote healthy. So I woke up one day and I felt really tight. Like my traps are on fire, just like every signal my body could give me that, like, hey man, just take it easy today. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna take the day off, even though I'm supposed to do, I think it was legs and back or something. And so I start foam rolling and, like, just getting mobility work going. And then this would happen quite frequently. I would convince myself, actually, I don't feel that bad. I could pull something off. And so I did a bunch of pull-ups that day and like some air squats or something like that. And I remember I woke up the next day and I didn't know what the hell happened, but I had back neck tension before from like traps and things like that. But this was like front neck tension that went all the way up into my throat muscles. And it was like the weirdest, creepiest feeling ever. And it didn't go away for like 6 years. Like, and
Oh,
so I
shit.
became obsessed over it. Like, so much so that I gave myself a panic attack one time when I went to Electric Forest because I was on my way there, 16-hour drive. I was the passenger. And so for those entire 16 hours, I decided to Google what muscles were tight in my neck and how to get them to loosen up. So by the time I got there, I was in such a panicked fight or flight state that, of course, I wasn't in touch with my body. So I ended up connecting with cannabis, took some kratom, took a microdose of mushrooms. And before I know it, I go back to my tent and all my friends are sitting there, and I sit down and I really quickly realize that every breath I take, I can only take half the breath next time.
Mm.
Now I'm sitting there, I'm not freaking out about it, but at the same time, I'm like, this does require my attention very immediately because I'm like, at this rate, I have like 3 breaths. So I look at my friend who had done the same combination as I had, and I go, hey man, I think I'm dying. And he goes, yeah, me too. And just goes back to talking, like totally thought I was kidding. And so that was all I could say. And so I just kind of like stumbled out of this little canopy and fell into my tent. And all my friends were like, what are you doing? And I had my first panic attack. And
Mm.
so after that, I was working at the dispensary and that stuff was still going on. And I always wore my hair in a ponytail. And I was very restrictive of myself too, right? And so I had worn my hair in this tight ponytail. And when I went through my big awakening point where I realized I was connecting with cannabis unconsciously, took a 3 month break, right when I got back from that trip, which was in Las Vegas, and I go back to the dispensary, I just was not the same person anymore. And I decided, like, I literally remember as soon as I had that experience out there, I come back and I'm like, why do I always have my hair up on a ponytail? And I just like literally let it down. And when I went back to work, everyone's like, oh man, you seem like you're so happy. You seem like you're so calm. And before I had left for this trip, I was extremely triggered by this company that took us over because they were doing everything that was the antithesis of what I had loved about the company when I first started working with them. And
Mm.
so I let my hair down, literally, but also figuratively. And the headaches I had been having for a year and a half went away. Right. So, like, that's a perfect example. I had spent thousands of dollars on myofascial release massages, chiropractor, acupuncture, supplement routines, all these things just to literally have to, like, take a breath and let my hair down, like, literally and figuratively. And it went away. So, that's what it felt like back when I was stuck in those areas, was a lot of tension in the back of my head, a lot of neck tension, just a lot of tension in general. And then also like maybe not an emptiness, but like almost like a black hole in my heart, right? Like kind of like
Mm.
inverted energy where it was being sucked in rather than getting projected out. So yeah, I lived like that for quite a while.
Wow, what a struggle that must have been. And um, gosh, isn't it crazy to think that so much of what is wrong with us can be controlled by the breath, or the fact that you can't breathe, or that you're not taking full breaths, or even little things you can fix? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if letting your hair down also helped with the tension that you feel when your hair is pulled back. And like, that used to cause me a lot of headaches and things. Like we don't think about, especially for women too, you wear a heavy necklace and like, why does your neck hurt? You wear heavy
The
earrings.
necklace.
Like, why do you think?
Yeah.
And I see it happen for men too, like the one backpack over the shoulder, and then they wonder why they're out of alignment. But yeah, wow.
It's It's so funny you mentioned that because, it was like, first of all, like, this is one of the things I think, like, being a guy with long hair, I've picked up tactics from every woman I've dated, like back when I was way younger, it was like, oh, conditioner, that's important, right? And then like later on, it was like, oh, you want organic hair products, right? And that was like, when I met Rachel, she was one of the ones who kept saying, like, why don't you put your hair down? I love when your hair's down. And I was like, no, I can't, because what if it blows around and it's not perfect, right? Again, very restricted. And so, like, every woman I've dated has taught me one thing. And so, any guys with long hair listening, if you're wearing your hair in a tight ponytail and you have headaches, dude, it might be the ponytail. Like, literally, I think that was most of it, to be completely honest. And it was metaphorically like what it represented, which was me just saying, fuck it. Like, if my hair
Mm,
gets messy, my hair gets messy. I don't care anymore what people think of me because I'm choosing to love myself for all of me. The parts of me that, yeah, maybe sometimes my hair looks like a wreck. I don't care because the people that I know will love me would never care. If anything, it would make them laugh and it would actually like bring their energy up. So what was I worried about? And so that was like, it just happened. Like that shift happened so quickly that it was a very interesting time in my life, because about a couple months later, the pandemic or whatever you want to call it happened. And so I now had all this space to like integrate this, and I'm sure we
mm.
we both know how important integration is. And at that point, it wasn't like I was an integration master or anything. It just I got gifted with that time, and there was no distractions. I couldn't go to any concerts. I couldn't go to festivals. I couldn't, at that point, go see my friends. The world was actually shut down for a good month anyway, before flights opened up and things like that. So, yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, well, and I love that too of how the lack of judgment for yourself and just that fuck it attitude changed everything. And that's something I'm
Yeah.
always working with my clients, trying to get them to that space of like, yeah, but you gotta just kind of say fuck it to everybody else. And I say it a little more eloquently, but it's true. It's like the more that you accept yourself for exactly who you are and radiate that, I am so continuously impressed at how many people vibe with that energy versus when I was trying to be this chameleon and like fit in with everybody, but never completely authentically myself. And once you get rid of that, it's like so many things get released off of your shoulders that you didn't even know you were carrying.
Yeah, the analogy I always give is it's almost like you've been carrying a backpack for many years that you didn't even realize was on you. And then when
Mm.
you realize it and you're like, dude, this thing's heavy as hell. What do I have in this? It must be super important stuff, right? And then you open it up and you're like, cinder blocks. What am I going to do with those? Like, well, I got to
What
put a
rocks
car
in
up on
here?
its. Yeah, exactly. What do I got to put a car up and take its wheels off? Like, what is happening here? And one of the best things I've found happens, and this was like, part of, I imagine anyway, what triggered this was, starting to be around individuals who were also living their lives like this. And I think that
Mm,
one of the best gifts we can give other people by living like this is the permission to also say, fuck it, because I think all of us feel it underneath that, like, we don't want to have to keep up this quote unquote act or any of these things, but yet we've been taught to believe we need to. And maybe we don't have any examples of people around us that are doing so and living in life in the way we're talking about.
mhm.
And when you can do that, when you can just own all the parts of you, right? And say, yeah, sometimes I'm a goofball. Sometimes I forget where I'm going in sentences. Sometimes my hair is a mess. I don't care. All of a sudden they go, oh my God, I'm so glad you did that. And you can feel like the weight come off them and they're like, fuck yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, I imagine what it feels like to take a bra off at the end of the day and just be like, fuck it. Like, it's like that loosening of restriction that until you do it, you're not aware, at least in my experience, of how much it was restricting you, and
Mhm.
that was the big takeaway. And since then, I've always asked myself, like, what else is my next realization like that? Like, where else am I still doing that? And where else could I liberate myself and liberate a metric fuck ton of energy by realizing that I'm really just restricting myself from being fully myself?
Mm, mhm. Well, I mean, well said. It's like
Mm.
once you get into the self-help and you see how much it catapults you forwards and makes your life better, and you've peeled those layers, you're like, what else is in there? Like, what can I peel back next, and what can I learn from and grow from? And it starts to take all of the challenges that you encounter and make them interesting lessons instead. And I'm not saying they're not hard. I'm not saying you don't cry. I'm not saying we don't still get low, but we start to have better tools to take us back up again. And it starts to be, for me, I've noticed in the last 6 months, things that would have put me in bed crying for a week and just tapping into depression, which is a space I'm so familiar with. We just love hanging on to sadness, don't we?
Hmm.
And places that I would have normally been like, oh God, I'm so depressed for a week, maybe 2 weeks, to just hang and just like wallow in it. I find now I take like a day, I'll cry, take 2 days, and then I'm like, all right, like this doesn't feel good. This literally doesn't feel good, and it's bringing my energy, and now it's manifesting more negative shit into my life. Like, gotta get a handle and bring that energy
Yeah,
back up. That even if you don't believe it, start telling yourself you do, because you can trick your mind into believing it. Sit in those happy
exactly.
memories and transform.
It's so true. Like there's one analogy that I use for this, right? So when I first got into exercise, right, I was like, why the fuck do people do this? This sucks. Like you're going to go there and it's painful and you got to sweat and you got to push yourself and all these things. But once I started realizing the payoff, right, which I didn't know existed at that point because I hadn't experienced it myself, sure, I could see people that looked fit online. I could understand logically that, like, if you go to the gym long enough, you're going to look fit. But until I started realizing that it was possible for me to get the payoff, that's when I started translating like that feeling into like, oh no, this is fun. And now,
Mm,
like, as clearly, shown by that story I told you, it's hard to keep me out of the gym, right? Because I'm so like big on that payoff. And so, like anything, I think that, when people start talking about, like, say, shadow work or, spiritual development or any of these things, they might just not be aware of the payoff. And so they're like, well, why would I do that? But hopefully not, but maybe when they reach a low enough low where they're like, I surrender, right? I'll
mm-hmm.
try anything. Can they actually figure out the payoff? And I think, Paul Chek says often that pain is a teacher. And I fully believe that because, that neck tension and headaches, like there was no way those were going away. And there was no way I was going to stop trying to figure them out.
Mm-hmm.
But what I realized was I was going in the wrong direction at a certain point. And it was in surrendering that I ended up finding the direction my heart led me in, which ended up being the right direction. And so, yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I 100% agree. Like, it's not like I don't fall into those periods, but now I'm quicker to catch it and go, why am I doing this again? No one's going
Mm-hmm.
to come save the day for me. Like, I get to get myself out of this, and it's super empowering.
I love that. Like, you get to become your own superhero. Like you
Yeah.
get to have your own avatar that's like the superhero version of you. And it's like, okay, what would I do if I was the superhero version of me that was just filled with love and light and could do everything that I wanted and lived this happy, amazing, could fly around and, for me, swim with dolphins as much as possible. But like, what would that
Yes.
version of me do right now? And when you think
Yeah.
about like what the future version of you would do, that's something I've been working on right now a lot with my coaches and my mentors, is like looking at this future version of you. And a future version of you has it all figured out and has done all of the healing, and not that it doesn't continue, but like if they've done it, what would future version of you tell present you to do, knowing that
Mm,
that's where you are in a year or in 5 years or in 10 years?
mm.
And it's an interesting little game you can play.
Yeah, what's so funny about that? So, the last question I got asked on this previous podcast was, so this guy does something really cool where every time he has a guest on, he has them, without knowing who the next guest is, make the last question that he's going to ask the next guest, right?
Oh.
So, it was super fun. And so this question was, the version of you that has everything you want, that, lives where you want to live, that is surrounded by the people that, he wants to be surrounded by, et cetera, et cetera, where is this version of you in 5 years? So it's just so
Mm.
synchronistic that you just mentioned, like, not only like that terminology, but you used 5 years in there too. It's like, there are no coincidences. So that was
Yeah.
really cool.
Hang on to that one. And clearly it's speaking to you right now. There's something in it.
Yeah, 100%.
So I'm curious. So you worked at a cannabis shop, I'm guessing before you were using cannabis consciously.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
how did that happen? What drew you to cannabis in the first place? And then how did you discover? using it consciously?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, when I was 16, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder after a whopping 5-minute meeting with this doctor. And within 10 minutes, they were recommending different pharmaceuticals, you know. And so, being a 16-year-old that didn't know any better, I tried them out. And, I choose to believe the doctor had the best of intentions, but, they're playing with a limited deck of information as well. And so, every time I tried one, I just felt how I would describe it in today's words, more disconnected from myself, like a zombie, And so I had been a good boy, just saying no for a while to cannabis. And I had tried it once when I was 14, but I did the Bill Clinton and I didn't inhale because there was actually like, it was like actually like a really peer pressure situation. There was this girl I liked and her brother was like, come on, smoke. And I was like, all right. And I like just pretended to be high. But when I really tried it the first time, took about 3 times before I like actually understood like what is this? What am I supposed to be feeling? Do I like it? But by the third time, I had this experience of not being my thoughts. So I
Mm.
realized in that experience that I was not anxiety. I wasn't anxious. I was just experiencing anxious thoughts, right? In an anxious state of being. And of course, like at that age, I didn't have the language which I do now to describe it, but it was a very profound experience for me. And so if we fast forward, a couple of years, I'm now interacting with a lot of cannabis because, like most people, I never got a user manual for the plant. I didn't learn anything about emotional awareness in school. So I hadn't realized that the thing that, yes, did help me was also a coping mechanism that I had, essentially like storied my way into telling myself was good to do all day, every day. It's a plant. No one's ever overdosed. You can't die from it. All of these things we hear that kind of scapegoat around the fact that, like, yeah, but if you're addicted to something and you're codependent with it, you can't really be in a power couple dynamic with it. And so when I was 18, I woke up one day. I was now in school for psychology and I started peeing blood and I had no idea why, right? It was very alarming, obviously, for me. And so when I went to the hospital with my dad, he asked me, he said, hey, I got to know, are you doing drugs? And I said, no, but I am interacting with a lot of cannabis. And I saw him have like this sigh of relief, right? So my dad was not a proponent, but it was interesting to me because he didn't freak out, right? Now, of
Mm.
course, he had his suspicions and things like that, but we had never had that conversation. And so when I get to the hospital, I'm there for like 4 days. They ended up finding a benign cyst on my kidney that had broken open. So that was what caused the blood. And this was my first mortality crisis where I really got into holistic health. And I can get more into that in a second. But when I was in the hospital, I brought my laptop with me because there was nothing else to do. And I started showing my dad when he was hanging out with me all of these videos I'd been watching and research I'd been doing on cannabis. And I started showing him, like, hey, this isn't this plant that you learned about in the 70s of reefer madness and all of these things. And to my dad's credit, he had no cognitive dissonance. He was like, wow, I guess I didn't know what I didn't know. And society
Mm.
didn't know what they didn't know in the 70s and 80s. And so he was like, listen, you're an adult, you're in school, you are fulfilling your responsibilities, you got a job. This is what works for you to get over your anxiety. I remember what your anxious times were like. So if this works, then hey, that's okay with me. And so, to my dad's credit, he was able to own that. And from that point forward, cannabis became a connection for us, right? And we had always
Mm.
been very close. I'm very close to both my parents. I'm an only child. I do have a stepbrother and stepsister, but they're 20 years older than me. And so, at this time, I had like basically like my my dad had started to notice that I wasn't exactly happy in school for psychology because in terminology I would use today, it started smelling like khakis and office supplies in there. It was like I started seeing myself get boxed in to a cubicle and I was like, get the fuck out of here. Because I've always been like, I've never liked working like these weird jobs. Like I had a job at Staples when I was a kid and it
Mm.
was soul sucking. Like it is what I tell myself anytime I get frustrated with the work I'm doing. I'm like, would you rather be at Staples? And then my whole energy turns around. Like, I'm grateful for the experience just to be able to do that with it. But so that year, I go to the Boston Freedom Rally, and which is a big public display of disobedience where, especially before cannabis was legal, everyone would come out, root for legalization. We would interact with cannabis in the commons. And so long as no one's doing anything stupid or trying to deal cannabis or anything, the cops wouldn't bother you. So I go there. And as soon as I come up from the subway, I hear a guy yelling, who wants to make butter with me? So I walk over, and it's this guy, Mike Fitzgerald, giving out this little pamphlet on this Cannabis Institute opening 5 minutes from my house, right? I live 20
Ooh.
minutes south of Boston. So it was a town next to me. So that was the first time I experienced a fuck yes from my heart. I had no idea what that meant, but I was like, I am on fire. I need to do this, right?
Mm.
So I go home, and because I'm a broke college student, I asked my dad, hey, could you help me with tuition? It was like $500. And he goes, I'll do one better. I'll go with you. I'm just really curious about this, you know?
Cool.
So yeah, we end up going together. I end up telling him the first time we go there, I'm like, this is what I want to do. And at this point, there was no industry on the East Coast. Like California and Colorado were pretty much the only places that had it. This is in 2011. And so when I start going to the school, medical passes, I talk my dad into buying me a grow kit. And our first harvest is terrible, like absolutely
Mm.
garbage, right? So I start realizing that I need to learn a little bit more from the school than I originally went there for. I just went there to like kind of learn stuff. And now I was interested in cultivation. So I end up learning everything about the science of cannabis, the pharmacological aspects, the history of the plant, which is very illuminating if people haven't looked into it. Organic cultivation, Korean natural farming, working with the earth, biodynamic farming, and a range of holistic health stuff because they had a holistic health advocate there. It was like,
Mm.
oh, you're drinking apple cider vinegar? Are you drinking lemon water? Are you eating sprouts? Like all these things opened up to me. And because of that mortality crisis, I was now exercising. I was eating what I thought was healthy at that point. I realized real quick it wasn't, but at least I was trying. And so, I was really focused on all this, and I had now started to see the payoff, and I was hooked. I was just like, how much better can I possibly feel? I don't know. Let's figure that out. So I ended up going to the school. I ended up interning for them. I ended up working for them. And in 2014, I go to this music festival in Las Vegas, EDC Las Vegas, and I do MDMA for the first time.
Ooh.
And so I had done a lot of research and realized it's a hard opener. I was like, I don't really know what that means, but I'm okay, that might happen. And so when I take it with some friends, we're like in the middle of the crowd, and I feel this really interesting sensation in my heart. And I knew it had to do with my dad. And I didn't know what it was about, but I knew that it was something to do with my dad. And so logically, I'm like, well, I'm in Vegas. My dad likes Vegas. I'm going to steakhouses. My dad and I love steak. I was like, I just chalked it up as like something like that. Well, when I got home, I realized that 9 days after I got home, he got diagnosed with terminal cancer. And
Oh.
so I had no idea how to process that when it happened, right? Like I remember like just being a deer in headlights. And my dad was too, like we both had a similar way of just being like, hey, yeah, I got cancer and I'm going to die from it. I'm like, okay, cool. And he's like, all right, now help me fill a pool. I'm like, all right. Like that was literally how it went. It was like
Mm.
one of those things where I could tell, obviously he was scared. I was scared, but neither of us wanted to let each other in on like how serious this really was. So my dad had just finished up bringing his brother to Dana-Farber in Boston, one of the biggest cancer institutes, for 3 years, every single week for chemo and radiation.
Oh my
So he had
gosh.
witnessed like what these things had done to his brother. And he was like, fuck that. I got a great head of hair. I'm not losing my hair. I'm not losing my dignity. I'm not going to stop smoking cigarettes. I am who I am. And I want you to respect me for that. And so I had this fork in the road. Do I love my dad for the person he's always been, albeit unhealthy, but amazing, incredible father, super funny, charismatic, all the things? Or do I try to change him into the version of him that I think he should be so that I can maybe have him around, but also potentially ruin his quality of life in the meantime and be selfish? And so luckily, I chose the first way. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to help you as much as you need help. And at first, he was very turned off to the idea of using cannabis because he still wasn't using it at this point, right? He'd gone to school
Mm.
and all these things, but he was like, I just like my sober state of reality. And he was a cigarette smoker and, a steak and cheese sub lover and Coca Cola lover and all those things. And that was my dad. And
Mm.
so after a couple of weeks, I didn't realize, but when they had diagnosed him on July 9th, they only gave him until Halloween. He had small cell carcinoma. So it was very fast and aggressive. And it had already gone to his brain and it had gone to his lymph nodes. It was all throughout his body. And so after a couple of weeks, he started experiencing some pretty severe pain. And we started having the conversation of like, he's like, okay, so if I interact with this cannabis, what is this going to do? Because when we were at the school, what ended up happening was with the owners of the school were helping a lot of cancer patients with RSO, aka Rick Simpson oil, or its
Mm.
professional name FICO, full extract cannabis oil. And I was witnessing with my own two eyes, Barrett, people coming in having cancer, getting their lives in order, and using cannabis at the same time as they're eating healthy, these kind of things, getting out of stressful situations. Coming back a period of time later, check out my scans. There's nothing there. Dana Farber is absolutely mystified, right?
Yeah.
So I was not naive. I knew I wasn't going to save my dad's life. Like he was still going to do the things that ultimately were his downfall. But could I prolong his life and his quality of life? And so he agreed to start using cannabis. So we took the last harvest that we ever cultivated together and I turned it all into RSO and I started feeding it to him. And when I started feeding it to him, I would sit with him because here's someone who's really never interacted with cannabis and now they're interacting with the strongest form of cannabis on planet Earth, right? So when I was sitting with him, I expected just to answer some questions for him, hang out, watch movies, those kind of things. And my dad and I were always very close, right? But during that time, I really discovered the power of cannabis. Like I thought I had already discovered it with being able to help me with anxiety, all the information I had learned, its ability to help me question things in life and use discernment. I thought I had figured cannabis out. But I had only scratched the tip of the surface because when my dad and I were sitting there during these periods where I was, watching over him, I got to hear stories that I had never heard about his childhood. I got to watch him have the time and space to have closure with his grandchildren, his other children, me, my mother, and most importantly, his own mortality. We got to
Mm.
take the heaviness out of subjects like death. And instead of looking at death as an ending, we got to look at it as another chapter in a series of infinite chapters that go on forever. And it got to be the theme of like, what do you think happens when you die? I don't know. Are you excited? Kind of, right? Like these kind of things. And of course, it was still painful, right? But a lot of times what I've realized in losing other people in my life is it's the questions you feel you never got answers to, the what ifs that really eat you up. And so during that time, my father ended up lasting until June of the next year, right? So,
Wow.
can I say objectively that cannabis was the reason? No. But what I can say, based on the science they were showing us on the scans, was that his tumors that were at first growing very fast slowed down about 70%. And so,
Wow.
through that time, he ended up lasting a lot longer. And I ended up getting to have that closure with my father. And so, after he passed, I made it my life mission to get the true power of cannabis out to the world, right? Now, once again, I thought I had figured it out. And so then dispensaries are now opening in Massachusetts. I end up working at one for 5 years, worked with over 5,000 different medical patients on a range of things. They'd come in saying, my cannabis isn't working as good for me. And I'd be like, well, how much water are you drinking? What's your diet
Mm.
like? Are you sleeping well? I would essentially coach them before I was a coach,
Right.
and my background in psychology helped out a lot because I was fascinated. I was like, I can't just be cannabis. It's got to be like some other things that might be leading to why cannabis isn't working well and your endocannabinoid system isn't optimized. And so after 5 years, the company got bought out by another company. And at first, like I said before, I was super triggered because these were all finance and real estate people. Everything I had avoided my whole life was now parading into the dispensary and telling us that they knew better, they had money, they'd figure it all out. And I was just sitting there seething because I was like,
Mm.
what are you doing here? Get out of here. But looking back in hindsight, it was the best gift that life, God, whatever you want to call it, could have ever given me because I'm also someone who holds on for dear life and stays in things a lot longer than I should. So because I was triggered so fucking hard because everything they were doing was an antithesis of who I am, I ended up deciding that I was going to go to MJ BizCon out in Las Vegas, biggest cannabis convention in the world. And I was going to find my own investors and open my own dispensary and do my own thing. That's what I thought I wanted at that point. So I go out there with Rachel and my buddy Devin. We were like the entrepreneurs at the dispensary, aspiring entrepreneurs. So we go out there with all these expectations. We're going to find investors. It's going to be easy. And sure, we found people that wanted to invest in us, but their only questions were like, how many grams per square foot can you grow me? What's the cheapest you can grow a pound? Like these kind of things that were just more of like, this is not where I parked my car type vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And so the last night there, we left early because I was just like, I cannot take this scene anymore. And so the last night there, we kind of realized our dream had not died, but it wasn't going to happen in the way we thought. So in this moment, we lost expectations. And I asked Rachel, I go, what do you want to do? It's our last night here. And she goes, do you want to go to a strip club? And I was like, fuck yeah, right? Because I honestly, I had never been to one. She had never been to one. So we were like, fuck it. So she was like, do you want to do some MDMA? And I was like, let's go, right? So we do a little MDMA. We go to the strip club and we have a blast. We're like talking to the strippers and just having an absolutely epic time. And we end up leaving way too late. I was tasked with keeping track of time. And we end up leaving like just way later than we thought. I think it was like 8 in the morning.
Oh
And in
shit.
that moment, it was just time flew by. And in that moment, I watched Rachel go through like a challenge because she was working on this 600-page application for a Chicago, Illinois dispensary, super boring. And she was supposed to be working on it on the plane. Now she had no energy to do so. And she already didn't want to do this. So in that moment, instead of trying to make an excuse of like, well, we were both having fun. You could have checked the time, like the things that I would normally do at that point to not take accountability. I just was like, yeah, I'm sorry. This was my bad. And the second that happened, I just felt this very interesting feeling that, again, it can't really be described in words, but this power come into me, right? And so we're on the plane ride home. We got like 1 hour of sleep. I have a pounding migraine, but I'm in this like bliss state because I'm like, what just happened? And so I start communicating with what I believe to be my soul, higher self, etc. And I start asking myself, like, what the hell just happened? And this voice tells me, you felt her emotion and you empathized with her. And I go, I haven't felt anything like that in years. And I go, yeah, because you're keeping yourself so busy so you can't feel what's going on in your body. And so I'm like, oh my God. And they were like, and you're also numbing out with cannabis, right? So now I get back and I immediately just quit cannabis cold turkey. I thought I can't interact with cannabis anymore. This is what this plant does, yada, yada, right? A month into that, I realized, oh, no, it's not cannabis. It was me. It's my patterns with it. And I have to take accountability of that too. So this is now, again, like right when this is happening, I'm at the dispensary, I'm letting my hair down, all this stuff's happening, right? That's to bring you up in context. So after 3 months, I decided to start connecting with the plant again, but I make myself a set structure. And I just felt like I was going to do this. I didn't read it anywhere. I was like, all right, I want to be able to connect with this plant that I love, but I also don't want to fall into that same spot I was in. So I'm like, okay, Monday through Friday is when I'm most prone to stress. And stress is the reason I'm numbing out, right? I don't want to feel my feelings. So I'm going to go abstinent from Monday through Friday every week. And then whatever triggers come up, I'm going to keep track of them. And then on the weekends, I'm going to make an intention to specifically ask cannabis why I'm triggered in those areas. So essentially doing shadow work. And what happened through that, Barrett, was I realized, holy shit, this plant is a living entity the same way that I always felt it was, but it can help me. And I knew it was really helping because a lot of the things it was showing me were very challenging. Like they were like, yeah, you're not really being a man when you're not taking accountability of your life. And these things aren't attractive. And like, it was just like this really tough mother love. And, and so like, through that time, I ended up starting the podcast because I just knew I was going to, and I knew I needed to. It was coming from my heart. I couldn't tell myself no anymore. I quit the job and I didn't have any hate in my heart about it. I said, hey, no one's keeping me here. This is my choice. I got to leave if I'm unhappy. You know, I can't expect these people to run their business how I want it to run just because I say so, right? So I ended up leaving there, start the business. And then I spent the next 2 years when the pandemic happened, just saying yes to my heart, got into coaching, just again, like just following the cues. You know, I had heard this guy, Mark England, on a podcast 3 years prior with Rachel in the cultivation room. So one day I'm making a post in my sober state of reality, just like so connected to my heart, make a written post on Facebook about perspective. And I talk about how language shapes our reality. Someone comments, that's awesome. Where'd you learn about that? Can you give me a resource? I'm like, oh, that guy, Mark England. Yeah, I tag him. An hour later, I get my first voice note ever on Instagram from him. He's like, hey, man, I really like what you're talking about. We should hop on a call, right?
Whoa.
We joke, me and him, that this is the only good thing Facebook ever did, right? Is connect us. And so I hop on a call and he's like, dude, you should really think about hopping on my program. I think it'd be really big for you. And so I just said, fuck it. And I said, yes. And that changed my entire life. 6 months later, he invited me down to his lake house. I met all of these individuals, including Mark and just all of these amazing people that I had known on Zoom at that point. From that party or that get together, that Chris Marhefka, my buddy, was like, hey, I'm hosting a men's retreat in Colorado in a week. You should come. I was like, okay. So I went to that. I went to there. Danny Rios, I met him there and he was like, I'm going to Mexico for 6 weeks. You should come. I call Rachel. You want to go to Mexico? Sure. I end up meeting my business partner, Alex, there. He hears the talk Danny and I have where Danny's like, dude, you're a medicine man. Like, this is what you do. Because I'm bringing my cannabis around. I'm showing him it. So Alex approached me the next day. Hey, man, I just really like, your vibe. Would you want to host a retreat with me in Oregon in like 8 weeks? I'm like, sure. So we go right from Mexico to Oregon. And this just continues, Barrett, for like literally it's still happening now. Like just been traveling and having experiences and gaining wisdom. And it was so funny because Danny just got to go through Connect with Cannabis. And he's like, dude, it is fucking wild sitting here, having gone through your course, knowing that like at one point you were like, I don't know what I should do with this. And we had that conversation, and now like you did it, dude. Like, look at you, you're doing it. And it was like such a full circle moment. And so like, again, I say to a lot of people that, just like anyone in life, right? Like not everyone is our best friend, but yet certain people just for some reason are. Cannabis and I are connected like this. And every time I've gone into a deep, deep psychedelic journey, the plant is always there. And I always know objectively that we've done this dance for many lifetimes before. And that in many lifetimes, I've had this struggle before where I get way too close to her. And she's like, you need to get away from me. I can't live your life for you. You need to go spread the teachings. All right. I can teach you stuff, but if you're not integrating, I can't keep teaching you. And then you're just using me. You're not actually connecting with me. And that's not the relationship that we can have. And
Mm.
so it's really been just a journey of following my heart that's got me here. And I love telling the story. It's lengthy, but it really gives a lot of context, because I think a lot of people wonder, like, why cannabis of all plant medicines? And I wonder too, and I don't have the answer, but I just know that it's right for me, and so it's beautiful.
Yeah, I don't think we get to pick our medicine or medicine picks us when you're a
Yeah.
facilitator. And I love your story. I mean, you had me in tears about with the story of your dad. And I actually have a Rick Simpson oil story as well, because I had just had someone come into my life. My grandma was getting ready to pass, and she had been diagnosed with this terminal cancer. And I knew I was going out to visit her and see my dad, who's a doctor, and my aunt. And I had this one client, and I told him I was going to see my grandma who was been diagnosed with this terminal hip cancer. And he's like, I got something for you. He worked in the cannabis industry. He's like, I've got this Rick Simpson oil. It is reversing people's terminal cancer. And he
Mhm.
said, let me just give you some. Take it. If you don't use it on her, pass it along to someone else who could use it. And I was like, okay. So I took it down there and told my dad, who's an anesthesiologist, and was like, "What do you think? What do you think about trying it on her?" And my dad was like, "Yeah, all right, let's do it." And so we were supposed to give like a milliliter on the thing, and my dad just like goes to give it to her. Whoop! Finger slips, gives her like 4 milliliters. And so my grandma's never been high a day in her life. Like she's barely been drunk. And so my grandma now gets high for the first time in her life. And we had a blast. Like we went through all of her cookbooks because she was a phenomenal cook, and she had all these recipes, and she'd be like, "Oh my God, that looks tasty." Like she was like, "Why am I so hungry right now?" And then she was just sort of like, she needed help going to the bathroom and stuff, because she was like, I feel like I'm drunk, but I'm not drunk, and I don't know if I like this or not. And we were like, that's cool, Grams. You're fine. You're fine. Like, just enjoy it. And um, I'm really glad I got to have that. My last memory with her is of my grandma being high as shit, because the next day, she really kind of tanked. And from
Mm,
then, there was no, within a month she passed away.
yeah.
And from, yeah, part of it was sort of like, we think she was sort of waiting for her two kids to come back and see her, and me, her only granddaughter, to spend that time with her, that now she was comfortable to go. But
Mm,
it was fun to try getting her high.
yeah. That's
And
so beautiful.
yeah, so I love that it gave your dad so much more time. And I love when you reflect on your life and you can see how your relationship with the medicine really has been similar the whole way through, and how important it was with important people in your life. I keep having similar realizations with mushrooms. And
mm,
I love other medicines as well, but I don't think I'll ever serve anything besides psilocybin. And even
yeah.
recently, I'm getting some help restructuring my coaching program and my coaching offerings, and really honing in on my marketing. And my initial thought was that I wanted to open up, and I wanted to have more clientele available than just this psychedelics industry. There's people willing to do psychedelics. And I was like, just open it up to self help, and authenticity will be my niche. Um, and I was meeting so much resistance. Like what you're talking, I felt like I was swimming upstream every day trying to come up with my program ideas, my niche, who I'm targeting, what they're going through. It just was all so challenging, and I'm melting down about it. And I finally sit down and meditate, And the thing that just keeps smacking me in the face while I'm meditating is like, you're having so much trouble because you're not involving mushrooms. You're having so much trouble because you're not involving psychedelics. And I was like, okay, I give up, and it was like right around the luckiest day of the year, which was April 11th, when Jupiter and the sun aligned. And so the sun is like sending all this extra force behind Jupiter, the giver of gifts, like into our lives. And I hadn't had anything amazing happen on the, like, I got like $40 off my Aura ring that I finally jumped in on. And I was like, yay, I'm grateful. And that day I was like, okay, I'm going to do a money magnetizing meditation. And mushrooms are smacking me in the face with like, you're not using us. And I come out of this meditation to receive a message from a client who booked a mushroom ceremony with me right there on the spot. And then
Oh,
had another client come to who was interested in some products as well as another ceremony. And it was just like, oh, okay, right. I get it. Anything, as long as I embrace this path of psychedelics, like the door is open and we are flowing with the river, and everything keeps coming to me. And so I started leaning into, okay, now I coach people utilizing psychedelics, how to get out of their rut and how to have that life they've dreamed of, with psychedelics as a premise for helping that, because they saved my life. They're such a huge part of my journey. And now I've got people jumping on my schedule left and right to talk about how it could possibly help them and what they could do to yeah, follow in my footsteps. Um,
oh, I
so
love that. It's funny too, because I was telling you before we hit record that I recently, like very recently, had a very deep mushroom experience, and I hadn't had one in about 2 years. And mushrooms are my second favorite thing, and
mm,
cannabis is only my first favorite, because for me it's more practical for like my busy life, that I can connect with the plant, still like make sense of things. I don't have to take like time away for a ceremony, but at the same time, that's not to discount mushrooms. Like, they have opened me up in ways that cannabis does not, and cannabis opens me up in ways
mm,
that mushrooms do not. Right, but they're
right.
really like a yin and yang in my life. And I had this really interesting realization that I'm curious your thoughts on, because when I was there, I knew this to be true. And of course, as you come out, you're like, okay, your logical mind starts coming in. You're like, what does this mean? Right. But so I do a lot of work with Kabbalah, and
Mm,
with the tree of life. And so with Kabbalah, you have these 10 sephiroths, right, that make up the tree of life. And spoiler alert, the tree of life is actually DNA, right? And so at the very top, you have what's called Kether, right? That's the closest a human can get to God without dying, basically, right?
mm,
So it's beyond polarity. And then from that Sephiroth, now the tree splits into the pillar of severity, aka the pillar of masculine, and the pillar of mercy, aka the feminine pillar. And then through the middle, there's the pillar of union, right? Because the idea is you want to create harmony. That's where Christ consciousness lives and things like that. So when I did mushrooms this time, because again, it's been a couple of years since I've gone that deep in mushrooms. I've done plenty of smaller doses, but it's been a long time since I've done like a 10 gram, experience. And so when I was there, of course, like, there's an entity there that speaks to you, right? Whether it's someone wants to say it's your higher self, I think it's personally like the mushroom entity, and they're really funny too. Like, I
they
think
have
they're
senses of
some of
humor.
like growing up in Boston, they have like a Boston sense of humor. Like, oh, what's that? Oh, nothing. You just got scared, didn't you? Like, they'll fuck with you in like a really funny way, but they're also like full of wisdom. Like, it's like your best friend that's known you for so long. They know your buttons and they'll push them in funny ways.
Hmm.
So what I realized there was like, wow, I really think that fungus, right? Like, things that are fungi are the closest you can get to God, because what I experienced there was that they are beyond polarity, right? Like cannabis,
Mm,
ayahuasca, peyote, wachuma, they're all feminine and masculine, right? I'm not sure about 5-MeO. I didn't get into that because I didn't ask the question when I was there, but I realized like these are extremely important, right? Like having more awareness of the feminine energy, having more awareness of masculine. But also it's kind of like the other part is experiencing beyond polarity. And that was what I experienced there, was like not feminine or masculine, just like beyond it all. And when
mm,
I thought about it, like it was relating it to like, yeah, the tree of life, Kether, that's where you're going, like that above polarity, like not even unionized, just like above it, And so I realized like, wow, that is the role that mushrooms play, at least in one way, shape, or form. And what this voice also told me was that LSD is very similar because it's from ergot fungus, and
Mm.
so it was very similar because I've honestly felt that LSD is same, but definitely very different to mushrooms in the sense that it can bring you to like just God, like straight up. Very similar to 5-MeO DMT. I imagine that's probably a similar type of example. But, LSD is more like, I don't feel like there's an entity there as much. I feel like you kind of guide your own journey,
Yeah.
whereas mushrooms, there's someone guiding you. That's the main difference. But that was a very interesting realization. And I noticed a lot of realizations. Like one of the clearest things I got was I met cannabis. I realized that we had been doing this dance for many lifetimes. And I realized that part of her mission is to flirt and to try to bring people into her, right? Especially men, because part of her training is to be able to resist and say, no, I need a clear mind right now, and I'm going to discern when this is correct for me. And I got the
Mm.
download, and I haven't like really built this out yet or anything, but I got the download that women have a very different dynamic with cannabis than men, right? In terms of like how often they can connect with it. Because I've met many women that can smoke cannabis and use cannabis all day, every day. And literally, it just feels perfectly in alignment, like when I'm around them. And so I'm not saying that like I don't think there's any objectiveness in what I'm saying. Like I don't know for sure if no man can do that. But what I realized, at least in my own experience, was that it was very important for me in my development as a man to be able to stand on my own 2 feet and be able to feel all of life. Because what I feel is that, men are here in a lot of ways to really be explorers, but to also like be pillars, right? And be strong. And so, like, a lot of our ability to be a man rests in our ability to feel all of life, right?
Mm.
And not like try to be tough guys through it, like open up and be vulnerable. Like, yes, this is hard for me, right? But be able to be open and honest and feel. Whereas women are much more nurturing, right? And I'm just using like, like gender here, but there's obviously a bunch of mix mash here. But like women are meant to support, to nurture, and to remind men to come back into their hearts, right? And allow them to be that strong, right? And so, like, it was beautiful the dance I was seeing as I started to come out of that union point into masculine and feminine energy. And it was all good. Like, it wasn't like, oh, you're a bad person if you're doing this or that. It wasn't like anything like that. It was just like, well, here's how things operate. And like, if you like, why I experienced those things with cannabis was because, like, yeah, you weren't really fulfilling your duties as a man for yourself first, but also for the people that you could help in the world, right? So we needed to show you that, like, hey, you need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet because there are other people that need your help. And if you're not doing it, you can't speak as if you're doing it. And so it was very clear as day. And it really was like Return of the Jedi feel, where I was like, wow, I got to like really sit into like my own love for myself and the challenges I've gone through, both with the plan and also like just everything. I had my cat passed away a couple of weeks ago that I've had for like
Mm.
years. He was there when my father passed away. We had a very deep connection. And during another mushroom experience, the last deep one I had, I realized he was a lover I had in a past life, right? Like it was a female
Mm.
energy and all of these wild things. So it was just a beautiful, like I realized I needed this experience because I'm still on a journey of learning how to give myself enough space in order to feel what I need to feel. And my mind is very good at telling me, no, you felt everything. And honestly, like when I feel my body, I don't feel any pain. But when I connect with cannabis, all of a sudden I'll start feeling these tight muscles and I'll start feeling these areas. And I'm like, oh shit, like I really am rooted in my mind a lot, which is okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing because in human design anyway, I'm a mental projector. So like that's a lot of my like power zone is my mind. But at the same time, everything in life is about balance. And so,
Mm.
yeah, it was a wild experience. And you're the first person I've told this to other than just Rachel or like my business partner. So, really cool stuff.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point. I don't feel like I know nearly as many women who are like daily wake and bakes as I do
Mm,
men.
mm,
I know a couple, and she's always kind of regrouping and relating to cannabis. She also sort of discovered when she took a month off that a lot of her panic and anxiety was coming at night after she smoked cannabis. Like she really,
mm.
and that's not normally what happens to people when they smoke. And so she thought it was helping, and then she realized it wasn't. So she was like, "Oh, okay, I'm gonna have to no longer smoke when I know I'm feeling that way and when I know that's coming." But I think that's so beautiful. Like I could see you teaching a course completely around that, like men's relationship with cannabis and the
Yeah.
beauty of that. And I love what you said about how they have such a sense of humor. Like a couple of weekends ago, I took 9.5 grams.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it started off as 4.5 grams. And about 2 hours in, I felt like I hadn't taken four. I felt like I took more like 2 grams. And I was like, shit, did I fuck this up? Like I really needed this like macro dose ceremony. I was going through a lot and I was starting to do some self work on having more flow and saying no to more things. And, my boyfriend at the time had been very unfulfilled because I was so busy and toxic scheduling. And so he was like literally ready to like leave that week. And, but then I changed really quickly. So he stayed. So there was like a lot of emotion I was processing. And he took 4 grams and he's like peaked and he thinks he's kind of coming down a little bit, which I'm also like, you don't come down off mushrooms in under 4 hours, but okay,
Yeah.
do you? And I was like, shit, like I had a microdose earlier in the day and I had done like a baby bump of ketamine. And I was like, did I fuck things up by having doing that? So I was like, okay, if I feel this way off of 4 grams, I need to double this to feel 4 grams. And so I went back to my mushroom stat and my boyfriend's like, you gonna take 4? And I was like, yeah, I think so. He's like, no, what's your full fuck yes? And I was like, oh, my full fuck yes is 5 grams. And he's like, then take 5 grams. And I was like, okay. And I was like, so I ground it up, put it in lemon juice so it would try to like catch up to the other ones and chugged it and sit down and like 5 minutes later, my 4.5 grams start kicking in and ramping up, like full ramp. And I'm like, oh. And all of a sudden there's like this spirit in my head that like it almost looked like from one of those animals from Where the Wild Things Are. And it just like turned and looked at me and it was like, and you just took 5 more. Buckle up, buttercup. You're in for a ride. And I was like, shit. Okay. And it was right. And then it ramped up and it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had. So yeah, they do. They have such senses of humor and they convey such beautiful messages. And I think you're onto something with that fungi not being masculine or feminine. Like I hadn't really stopped to consider that because I feel very much like psilocybin is like brother and sister with DMT. I mean, it's like
Mm,
psilocin, what it gets converted into in your stomach is like just one tiny little molecular difference from DMT. And so,
yeah.
specifically, what I've discovered with penis envy mushrooms, which is a strain of mushrooms, is that when you take a lot of it, you feel much more like you're on DMT than mushrooms. Um, and so, taking 9.5 grams to me just feels like I took a breakthrough dose of ayahuasca. So,
Hmm.
I highly recommend it to anyone who else has taken ayahuasca and kind of wants that experience at home. Take a big dose of penis envy. Um, but yeah, interesting because if you think about fungi, they're not a plant, they're not an animal. They like literally have their own kingdom. And you can't really say that about the other natural medicines out there. And so
Yeah.
that mycelium that runs under the whole earth and it connects everything. And so I really look at mycelium as being like the most magical creator and connector of this 3D reality that we live in. And it shows you other dimensions and things, but it really helps connect us all here in this world that we find ourselves in. And then, like, ayahuasca gets to be this cosmic goddess that and DMT that help connect you to all of the other dimensions and all of the other species and things. And it's also a beautiful healing medicine. But what I love is there's such a spectrum in this plant medicine and psychedelics range where it's like over here you're taking it for like the medicinal benefits and the healing, and then over here on this end you're taking it for exploration and meeting other species and having just alternate dimensional experiences and understanding what's really out there and what's really around us and the the matrix that we're in and how to unplug and um, yeah, that this world can really be everything that you desire it to be. But the key starts with healing so that you can then have the capacity to get to the multidimensional exploration if you desire, but healing. Start there.
It's so important. It's like if you're playing a video game, right, and you're picking stuff up, and eventually it's like you're over encumbered, you can't move, right? This happens in like Skyrim and Fallout and those kind of games. Well, you need to create space in order to bring new stuff in, right? And
Mm.
so it's the same way with how I look at healing, right? It's like people are like, why do I have to heal? It's like, well, no one says you have to, but are you looking to bring more stuff into your life? Like, are you looking to bring you're looking to have available space from which you can have the option to bring more stuff into your life, right? Because a lot of times we don't really know what we're going to find in life that we might love, right? But if we don't have the space for it, if we find it, we might not be able to actually embody it, right? And actually do
Mm.
it. And so that's how I've always looked at healing work is like, yeah, it's the thing you get to do first because throughout life you pick up a lot of stuff that at a certain age where you grow up, you realize like, I don't want any of this stuff. Again, the cinder blocks thing, it's like cinder blocks in there. What the hell's happening? And so you get rid of that. And now you have available space from which you can either just have space or you can put things in there that are actually going to serve you. And it's funny about the fungi thing too, because as I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, so they say that we're most similar to fungus, right?
Mm.
Like we're like something like we're closely related to fungus. And if we understand that in the 3D realm, Earth is our God, and Earth is connected by all mycorrhizal networks. And inside of us, we have fascia, which is essentially our mycorrhizal networks. Then there's really a lot of interesting correlations, right? Like, of course, we can't objectively say it's causation, but it provides a very strong case. And personally, for me, I feel like because I experience it and also just like thinking about it now, I'm like, yeah, there are actually a lot of coincidences, right? And when you think about the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, like the top level mystery school initiates were what's called masters of the net, right?
Mm.
So they were able to go through the net into different dimensions, right? And now with quantum physics, we talk about this unified field, string theory, all of these different things that look exactly like nets. What does a net look like? Mycorrhizal networks, right? So
Mm.
very interesting to think about this stuff. I don't pretend I have the answer, but I know that I don't know the answer. And that is even more intriguing than having the answer.
Yes, yes. And it's something that's got me thinking about these ancient societies, especially like ancient Egypt, and
Mm,
is that God, who I forget who phrased it for me the other day, but they were like, if the whole world got demolished today, um, think about how much of our stuff is like on computers. And like if a computer sits at the bottom of the ocean for I don't know how, like what, 5 years maybe, it would completely deteriorate. It would rust. We'd have no evidence left of it. And so here we are also looking back and searching for evidence of these cultures that we believe had no technology because we can't find evidence of it. But like if they did the same thing as us, if they made these instruments that also got demolished when sitting for 5 years underground or in the ocean, then of course we're not going to find their intelligence. And I believe they had so much of it. And it's like just because it wasn't written down, I mean, why did they even have to write things down when they could send more through the mind? And so I think we've really lost a lot of respect for the past cultures, and a lot of that knowledge just has to come back to us through channeling. And hopefully we'll get more of
definitely.
it.
Definitely. It's kind of like the story of Atlantis versus Lemuria.
Mm.
Like this story of Atlantis and Lemuria was Atlantis was, and again, there's many stories about this, but I really liked this rendition of it. And again, I wasn't there, at least in this meat suit, so I have no idea if it was true or not. But Atlantis was this very masculine, dominant energy, right? Like beautiful technology, right? And all of these things that were not inherently bad, but they let their masculine energy get too out of balance. And also, the
Mm.
masculine energy that was out of balance was not truly divine masculine energy. Sounds a little familiar to what's going on in a microcosm right now in the world, right?
Yeah.
Then Lemuria, on the other hand, was very feminine dominant. And they didn't have a lot of technology, but they had incredible gifts psychically. And they had telepathic, connection. And they had this beautiful connection to Earth. And apparently they had these crystals that could heal them of anything, right? And so Atlantis, what started happening over there was that they got so out of balance that a virus came and started wiping them out, right? Because
Mm.
viruses are a sign that things are not working. So they tried to go strong arm Lemuria into giving them these crystals, right? Lemuria said no. So what did they do? They blew Lemuria up, right? And so that goes the story anyway. And so then Atlantis, what happened to Atlantis was it fell in three sections, because basically the first section fell because they were experimenting with using their rose quartz pyramids as weapons. And they were messing with like this ridiculous energy and ended up blowing up part of the continent. And then the last like kind of like sinking was there was these two parts left, right? And they were pretty small, and they didn't like each other, right? They were just like warring, and they had not like tried to fight each other yet. So one side decided, hey, we're going to go map out all of the places that they have these like, weapons stations, if you will, missile sites. I don't know. I'm going to use terminology from today's world, but we're going to map that out, and then we're just going to go bomb them, and they're going to be done, and that's it. Well, what they didn't know was that the other place was thinking the same thing. And so when they went to go bomb them, there was a bunch of locations that they didn't know about. And so this place then bombed them, and they just sank each other, And so, again, I have no way to validate that story, but I've been told that by people that I do trust. And it makes a lot of sense. And regardless if it makes a sense, it is very interesting how right now in the world, we have this like, this overbearing, controlling energy, aka this version of masculine energy that is not actually what real masculinity is. And there's all these like nuclear bombs and these things that could blow the world up for what reason, right? Like because people can't get along. It's ridiculous, So a lot of similarities for sure.
Yeah, and if nothing else, for anyone who doesn't believe in Atlantis or Lemuria, you're entitled to that opinion, but the moral of the story is still one that we can listen to. And I mean, I'm a believer,
Definitely.
but yeah, the
Yeah.
moral of the story is something we can implement. And how do we bring our world back into balance? And the answer isn't women now rule the world and men be subservient to women. Like that's out of balance. But it is us learning to work together and honor each other for the different things that we bring to the table, and the different ways that we solve problems, and the different ways that we help each other, we stand with each other, that we support each other. So yeah, we've got a lot going on.
Oh, 100%. It's so funny, and yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because when you look back at matriarchal societies, the first thought might be, oh, women ruled the world at that point. It's like, no, women were smart enough to understand there needed to be balance, right? It was when men started warring and decided that women were way too powerful and they couldn't be trusted, that they then started to dominate. And so a lot of times men, these types of men, project their own way of living onto women. Oh, we can't let them control the world because they would take it over. It's like, no, that's you projecting how you look at the world, right? And
Mm.
so very interesting to realize that. I watched an episode of Ancient Civilizations on Gaia. Great show for anyone who wants to like dive into these ancient civilizations, Atlantis, Lemuria, etc. And they said that pretty much war did not break out until around, I don't know, 8 or 9,000 BC, and that was right when men started trying to, these versions of men anyway, started trying to dominate, and when things were ruled by women and men together, things were relatively peaceful. Like, sure, there were little skirmishes and things like that, but there was not like global wars, that didn't exist
Mm.
back then. There was harmony. And that's a lot of times what they talk about in the Bible when they talk about the fall from grace. It wasn't like a literal fall. It was a metaphorical fall in consciousness, from this unity consciousness, Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it, into this 3D realm where now people are the enemy because you look different, or you're in a different tribe, or you wear a different color, you're not me, right?
Mm.
Where before that, everyone understood that everything is God, that we're all connected, that we're all family. And so it's very interesting to look back and think that like, it's a shame that in today's world, and maybe not a shame, maybe it's all meant to be, but we're so left brain dominant that we read things like the Bible literally, when in reality they're written in riddles that, depending on your level of consciousness, you will read and interpret differently. And
Mm.
also like it's been translated through like, I don't know, a lot of different languages. So the version that we get is actually very different than the original version that was written. And just looking into like the whole idea of Jesus and his teachings, right? Like his real name was Yeshua, and his teachings. I have this book called The Law of Light. Dude was awesome. Like he wasn't a Christian, he was a Jew, and the things he was teaching were like really beautiful. It was like, hey guys, I'm not special. I can teach all of you how to do this. And now people worship him. And he's probably like rolling over in his grave doing like, I wanted to empower everyone. I didn't want you to worship just me. I wanted you to
Mm.
know that you can do all of this. Same with Buddha, all of these deities, like they were ascended masters, like they would not be trying to get people to worship them. That's not what an ascended master does. It's not the same type of consciousness or same level of consciousness. So it is a very interesting time because I really feel there's more light hitting the planet than ever right now.
Mhm.
And also, what's going to happen when light hits the planet? We're going to start noticing, especially us that are, doing the work to rise our level of consciousness versus the people that aren't, and no judgment. It's just different flavors of ice cream. But you're going to start noticing that divide because you're going to start noticing, like, for instance, like, how are people still racist? I can't even understand it, right? Whereas back in the day, people might not have agreed with it, but they just kind of went along with it, maybe
Mhm.
not even went along with it. They just didn't say anything. Now, people are like, no, that's not okay, right? And people are lashing out and all these things. It's not that things are worse than ever. It's just that there's more light on the planet than ever. And so,
Mhm.
or at least since back then. And so, a lot of things that are clearly not the right way to be living in terms of harmony are being outed now for what they are. That's why people are starting to use terms like the Matrix, even the movie The Matrix coming out. Like, why are people even worried about what people are controlling or any of this? It's because they're starting to think differently. They're starting to feel differently, and so it's a very cool time to be alive. I'm very grateful that I get to walk the planet at this time in history.
Me too. Well, it is a pleasure to share this journey of love and light and healing with you, my friend. What is the best way that my listeners can keep up with you? How can someone work with you, and tell me all the deets?
Yeah, thank you so much, Barrett. First of all, this is an amazing conversation. I've enjoyed this so much, and for everyone listening, thank you. I know there's endless things vying for our attention these days, so the fact that you gave your attention to us, I'm so appreciative of. And the best way to find me is on Instagram at the real Ryan Sprague. Last name is Sprague. Shoot me a message if this episode wasn't clearly evident enough. I love talking, so trust me, you can hit me up with anything. I just love meeting people. And then the business Instagram is at highly.optimized. We do all the podcast releases on there and stuff. You can go check out Barrett's episode. It was amazing. She crushed it. And then you can also check out the two podcasts, the Highly Optimized podcast, which I'm currently on a hiatus from, coming back soon, and the This One Time on Psychedelics podcast. Super fun on both of them. And then if you're interested with Connect with Cannabis, go to my bio and download the free Conscious Cannabis Guide. It's, like I said, completely free. It's going to give you a lot of information. And then when you're ready to take the deep dive, book a call, get into the program. We have the most fun homework on the internet. It's super fun. We've had 12 classes go through. We're certifying people to go work with the power of cannabis in a coaching, facilitating, guiding, leading atmosphere. And it is beautiful. So again, thank you, Barry. This is amazing. I'm super excited to meet all of your amazing audience. And yeah, I'm super pumped.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure to have you. Love this conversation and looking forward to sharing you out. So, thank you so
Yes.
much for joining
Thank
me.
you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and review this podcast wherever you're listening. I'm so grateful to have you on this journey with me. Until next time.